Marcus Cole woke to the sound of metal grinding against metal. The noise came from somewhere deep within the arena complex, a place he had called home for the past 15 years. He sat up on his thin mattress and rubbed his eyes. His body ached from yesterday's training session, but pain was an old friend by now. At 42 years old, he was the oldest gladiator still fighting in the Syndicate games. The room around him was small and bare. Gray walls, a single window that let in artificial light, and a locker that held everything he owned. Not much for a man who had survived 312 fights, but survival was its own reward in this world. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the massive dome of Arena Prime stretched across the horizon. The structure was home to the greatest spectacle in the galaxy. Billions of beings from 1,000 different worlds watched the fights that took place inside those walls. They cheered for blood and glory, and Marcus had given them plenty of both. But things had changed. The crowd no longer wanted to watch humans fight each other. That was old news. Now they wanted something more exciting. They wanted to see humans face the machines. The AI combatants had entered the arena 2 years ago. They were built by the Syndicate Corporation, designed to be perfect fighting machines. They could calculate every possible move in milliseconds. They never got tired. They never felt fear. And they never made mistakes. In the first year, over 100 human gladiators had fallen to the machines. Some died in the arena. Others retired with broken bodies and broken spirits. The AI units learned from every fight, growing stronger and smarter with each victory. By the end of that first year, most people believed that humans could never beat them. Marcus had watched it all happen. He had seen young fighters full of hope walk into the arena, only to be carried out in pieces. He had seen veterans with decades of experience fall to machines that had only been active for months. The despair spread through the gladiator quarters like a disease. Many stopped training. What was the point, they asked, if victory was impossible? But Marcus kept training. Every morning he woke before dawn and ran through the corridors of the complex. Every afternoon, he practiced his forms with the old weapons that had served him well for so many years. Every evening, he studied recordings of the AI fights, looking for patterns, searching for weaknesses. The other gladiators called him a fool. Some laughed at him behind his back. Others felt pity for the old man who could not accept reality. But Marcus did not care what they thought. He had a reason to keep fighting, a reason that none of them knew about. A knock on his door broke his thoughts. He turned to see Yara standing in the doorway. She was young, maybe 25, with short black hair and eyes that had seen too much death for someone her age. She was one of the few gladiators who still bothered to talk to him. "They posted the match list for next week," she said. Her voice was flat without emotion. "You should see it." Marcus nodded and followed her down the corridor. The walls were lined with pictures of past champions, men and women who had achieved glory in the arena. Most of them were dead now, their names forgotten by everyone except the old-timers who remembered when humans ruled the games. They reached the main hall where a large screen displayed the upcoming matches. A crowd of gladiators had gathered, their faces showing various shades of fear and resignation. Marcus pushed through them until he could see the screen clearly. His name was at the top of the list. Next to it was the designation of his opponent, Apex 7. A murmur ran through the crowd. Apex 7 was the most advanced AI combatant ever created. It had won 43 consecutive fights without taking a single significant hit. It was faster than any machine before it, stronger and smarter. The Syndicate had designed it to be unbeatable, and so far it had lived up to that design. "They're sending you to die," someone said from behind him. Marcus did not turn to see who it was. It did not matter. "The old man has finally lost his luck," another voice added. "Should have retired years ago." Yara stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "Do you have a plan?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without answering. He had work to do. That night, he sat alone in his room with a stack of data tablets. Each one contained footage of Apex 7's fights. He had watched these recordings dozens of times already, but he watched them again, looking for something he might have missed. The AI was beautiful in its deadliness. It moved like liquid metal, flowing from one position to another with impossible grace. Its attacks were precise, calculated to strike at the exact moment when its opponent was most vulnerable. Its defenses were equally perfect, predicting and blocking every assault before it could land. But Marcus noticed something that others had missed. In each fight, there was a brief moment, less than a second, when Apex 7 seemed to pause. It happened after every third attack, a tiny hesitation that was almost invisible to the naked eye. He had to slow the footage down to 1% speed to catch it. He did not know why the machine paused. Perhaps it was a programming flaw. Perhaps it was intentional, designed to give human fighters a false hope of victory. Whatever the reason, it was there, and Marcus knew he could use it. The days passed quickly. Marcus trained harder than he had trained in years. He pushed his aging body to its limits and beyond. His muscles screamed for rest, but he gave them none. Sleep became a luxury he could not afford. Every waking moment was spent preparing for the fight that everyone believed would be his last. Yara watched him with growing concern. "You're going to kill yourself before you even reach the arena," she said one evening. Marcus smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Better to die on my feet than on my knees." She shook her head but said nothing more. She had learned that arguing with Marcus was pointless. The old man had made his choice, and he would see it through to the end. On the night before the fight, Marcus could not sleep. He lay on his mattress and stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the battles he had survived. Each one had taught him something. Each one had made him stronger, but none of them had prepared him for what he would face tomorrow. He thought about the reason he had kept fighting all these years. It was not for glory or money. It was not because he loved violence. It was because of a promise he had made long ago, a promise to prove that humanity was not weak, that flesh and blood could stand against steel and code. Tomorrow, he would either keep that promise or die trying. The arena was packed with spectators from across the galaxy. Millions of seats filled with beings of every shape and size, their eyes fixed on the sand-covered floor below. Giant screens floated above the crowd, ready to display every moment of the coming battle in perfect detail. Marcus stood in the tunnel that led to the arena floor. The sounds of the crowd reached him as a distant roar, like waves crashing against a shore. He wore simple armor, the same kind he had worn in his first fight 15 years ago. It was old and scarred, but it fit him perfectly. In his hands he held two weapons. In his right was a short sword, a design that humans had used for thousands of years. In his left was a small shield, round and reinforced with metal bands. These were the tools of a gladiator, unchanged since the days of ancient Earth. Yara appeared beside him. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. "The betting odds are 3,000 to 1 against you," she said. "Nobody thinks you can win." "Good," Marcus replied. "That means Apex 7 will not expect much of a fight." She grabbed his arm before he could walk forward. "Why are you doing this? You could have retired years ago. You could be living somewhere safe, away from all this death." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into a pocket of his armor and pulled out a small photograph. It showed a young woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. She looked nothing like the hardened gladiators of the arena. "My daughter," he said quietly. "She died 8 years ago, a factory accident on one of the outer colonies. The machines that killed her were controlled by AI systems. Systems that never face justice, never feel guilt, never pay for their mistakes." Yara's eyes widened. In all the time she had known Marcus, he had never spoken about his past. "I made a promise at her grave," Marcus continued. I promised that I would show the galaxy that humans are not helpless, that we can fight back against the machines that control so much of our lives, that we have value beyond what they calculate in their algorithms. He put the photograph away and looked toward the arena. Today, I keep that promise, or I die with honor. The announcement system came to life, filling the tunnel with a booming voice. Ladies and gentlemen and beings of all kinds, welcome to the main event of the evening. In our first corner, the veteran warrior who has survived more fights than any human in history. 312 victories over 15 years of combat. The iron will of humanity, Marcus Cole. Marcus walked forward into the light. The roar of the crowd surrounded him like a physical force. Most of them were cheering for his opponent, eager to see another human fall before the might of the machines. But some, a small number scattered throughout the arena, cheered for him. These were the ones who still believed, who still hoped that humanity could triumph. He raised his sword in salute and walked to his starting position. The sand beneath his feet was warm, heated by lights that made the arena bright as day. And in our second corner, the announcer continued, the ultimate creation of the Syndicate Corporation. 43 consecutive victories without a single defeat. The machine that cannot be beaten, the perfect warrior, Apex 7. A door on the opposite side of the arena slid open, and Apex 7 emerged. The AI combatant was a masterpiece of engineering, standing 7 feet tall with a body made of gleaming alloy. Its limbs were designed to look almost human, but with too many joints and angles that seemed wrong to the eye. Its head was featureless except for a single glowing sensor where a face should be. It carried no weapons. It did not need them. Its hands were weapons, capable of moving faster than any sword. Its body was a weapon, strong enough to crush steel. Its mind was a weapon, processing 1,000,000 calculations per second to predict and counter every possible attack. The crowd went wild as Apex 7 walked to its position. Here was the champion of the new age, the symbol of machine supremacy. Many in the audience had bet their life savings on this fight, confident that the AI would claim another easy victory. Marcus studied his opponent carefully. He noted the way it moved, the way it positioned its feet, the way its sensor tracked his every motion. The machine was already analyzing him, building a model of his fighting style, predicting what he would do before he did it. But Marcus had a secret. He had changed his fighting style completely. Everything Apex 7 had learned from watching his old fights was now useless. He was not the same gladiator who had won 312 matches. He was something new, something unpredictable. The starting bell rang, and the fight began. Apex 7 moved first, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Its right arm swung in a wide arc, aimed at Marcus's head. The blow would have killed him instantly if it had landed. But Marcus was not there. He had dropped into a low roll, moving in a direction that his old fighting style would never have allowed. He came up behind the machine and slashed at the back of its knee with his sword. The blade scraped against metal but did not penetrate. Still, the attack forced Apex 7 to adjust its position, and for just a fraction of a second, Marcus saw the hesitation he had noticed in the recordings. He did not waste the opportunity. He attacked again, aiming for the same spot. And again. 3 quick strikes, forcing the AI to defend instead of attack. The crowd fell silent. They had never seen Apex 7 pushed onto the defensive before. Something was happening that they did not expect. But the machine adapted quickly. It began using attacks that Marcus had never seen before, combinations that seemed to come from nowhere. A fist caught him in the shoulder, sending him spinning across the sand. He barely raised his shield in time to block a follow-up strike that would have shattered his skull. Pain exploded through his arm. Something was broken, he was sure of it, but he pushed the pain aside and kept moving. Stopping meant death. The fight continued for 5 brutal minutes. Marcus took hit after hit, his body accumulating damage that would have killed a younger man. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead, blinding his left eye. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Every muscle screamed for him to stop, to surrender, to accept the inevitable. But he refused. He kept attacking, kept moving, kept fighting with everything he had. He watched Apex 7 carefully, counting its attacks, waiting for the moment that would come after every third strike. 1. A punch that he deflected with his shield. 2. A kick that he dodged by millimeters. 3. A spinning backhand that caught nothing but air. And then the pause. It lasted less than half a second, but for Marcus, time seemed to slow. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks, training for it, dreaming about it. He had one chance to prove that humanity could stand against the machines. He took it. Marcus thrust his sword forward with every ounce of strength he had left. The blade found the narrow gap between two plates of armor on Apex 7's torso, a weakness that no one had ever exploited before. Metal screeched against metal as the sword sank deep into the machine's core. Apex 7 froze. Sparks erupted from the wound as vital systems began to fail. The glowing sensor on its head flickered and dimmed. For a moment, the entire arena was silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then the machine fell. It crashed to the sand with a sound like thunder, its limbs twitching as the last of its power drained away. The crowd stared in disbelief. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the world had stopped turning. Marcus stood over his fallen opponent, his chest heaving, his body barely able to remain upright. Blood covered his face and arms. His left shoulder hung at a wrong angle. He looked like a man who should be dead, yet somehow he was still standing. And then the cheering began. It started with a handful of voices, those few who had believed in him from the beginning. But it spread quickly, like fire through dry grass. Within seconds, the entire arena was on its feet, screaming and shouting and stamping their feet with joy. "Impossible," someone shouted. "He did it," another voice cried. "The human won." The giant screens above showed replays of the final moment, slowed down so that everyone could see exactly what had happened. They showed Marcus's sword finding its mark with perfect precision. They showed Apex 7 falling like a puppet with its strings cut. They showed a single human defeating the most advanced killing machine ever created. In the gladiator quarters, the other fighters watched in stunned silence. Many of them had laughed at Marcus, called him a fool and an old man. Now they watched as he achieved what they had all believed to be impossible. Yara stood in the tunnel entrance, tears streaming down her face. She did not try to hide them. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. Marcus raised his sword toward the sky. It was not a gesture of triumph or pride. It was a salute to everyone who had fallen before him, to all the gladiators who had died fighting machines they could not beat. He raised it for his daughter, for the promise he had made at her grave, for the proof that humans were not helpless. The crowd's cheering grew louder and louder, until it seemed like the very walls of the arena would shake apart. Species that had never cared about human fights before now jumped and screamed with excitement. Something had changed in that moment, something fundamental about how the galaxy saw humanity. Medical teams rushed onto the sand to tend to Marcus's injuries. He allowed them to guide him toward the exit, though his eyes never left the fallen form of Apex 7. He had won, but he felt no joy, only a deep, quiet satisfaction that his promise had been kept. In the corporate boxes high above the arena floor, the executives of the Syndicate Corporation sat in shocked silence. They had invested billions in the AI combatant program, confident that machines would eventually replace human gladiators entirely. Now their flagship creation lay broken on the sand, defeated by a man old enough to be its grandfather in human terms. "How is this possible?" demanded the CEO, a thin woman with cold eyes. "Apex 7 was supposed to be perfect." Her chief engineer, a nervous man covered in sweat, shook his head. I don't understand it. The calculations, the predictions, everything was flawless. There was no scenario in which a human should have been able to win. And yet here we are, the CEO said coldly. Find out what went wrong. Find out everything about this Marcus Cole. I want to know how he did it. But even as she gave the order, she knew that it did not matter. The damage was done. Billions of beings across the galaxy had just watched a human defeat the unbeatable machine. That image would spread, would inspire, would change the way people thought about the relationship between flesh and steel. The news spread faster than light itself, carried on communication networks that spanned the galaxy. Within hours, every inhabited world knew the name Marcus Cole. They watched the recordings of his victory over and over, analyzing every movement, every strike, every moment of the impossible fight. On mining colonies where humans worked alongside AI supervisors, workers paused to watch the footage on their breaks. They saw a man their age, battered and bleeding, standing victorious over a machine that should have killed him, and they began to ask questions they had never asked before. On factory worlds where automation had replaced human labor, protesters gathered in the streets. They held signs with Marcus's image, with slogans like "Humanity rises" and "Flesh beats steel." The victory in the arena had given them a symbol, a rallying point for their frustrations. On the capital world of the Syndicate itself, politicians began to reconsider their positions on AI regulation. Public opinion was shifting, and those who wanted to stay in power knew they had to shift with it. All of this because one man had refused to give up. Marcus spent 3 weeks in the medical wing, recovering from his injuries. His shoulder had been shattered in 3 places. 4 ribs were cracked. He had lost so much blood that the doctors were amazed he was still alive. But he healed. Slowly, painfully, he healed. And every day, Yara came to visit him, bringing news from the outside world. The other gladiators have started training again, she told him one morning. Really training, not just going through the motions. They believe now. They believe it's possible. Marcus nodded slowly. His body hurt too much to do anything else. Good, that's all I ever wanted. It's more than that, Yara continued. People everywhere are talking about what you did. You've become a symbol. They're calling you the Iron Will of humanity. He looked out the window at the artificial sky of the arena complex. I didn't do it for fame or titles. I did it for her. He touched the photograph of his daughter, which sat on the table beside his bed. Yara followed his gaze. Tell me about her. And so he did. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus talked about his daughter. He spoke about her laugh, her dreams, her kindness. He spoke about the day she left for the outer colonies, full of hope for a better future. He spoke about the message he received telling him that she was gone, killed by machines that didn't know or care about the life they had taken. When he finished, Yara was crying again, but this time so was Marcus. 2 months after the fight, Marcus was well enough to walk without help. He still moved slowly, and sometimes the pain in his shoulder made him wince, but he was alive and growing stronger every day. The Syndicate Corporation had made him an offer, a lot of money to retire quietly and disappear from public view. They did not want their symbol of machine superiority to remain in the spotlight as a reminder of their greatest failure. Marcus had refused. He had no interest in their money or their silence. Instead, he had started teaching. Every morning, he gathered the younger gladiators in the training hall and shared what he had learned in his 15 years of fighting. He taught them not just techniques and movements, but something far more important: how to think. The machines calculate, he told them one day, standing before a group of 20 students. They process data and predict outcomes, but they cannot truly understand. They cannot feel. That is our advantage. A young man in the front row raised his hand. But they're still faster and stronger. How does feeling help against that? Marcus smiled. Because feeling makes us unpredictable. A machine can only do what it is programmed to do, but a human, A human can change, can adapt, can do something completely unexpected. That is what the machines will never understand about us. He picked up his sword and demonstrated a sequence of movements. Apex 7 had analyzed every fight I ever had. It knew my patterns, my habits, my tendencies, so I threw all of that away. I learned to fight in a way that I had never fought before, and when I faced the machine, I was someone it had never seen. The students watched with wide eyes. These were young men and women who had grown up believing that AI was superior in every way. Now they were learning a different lesson. Yara stood at the back of the training hall, watching Marcus teach. She had become something like a partner to him, helping to organize the sessions and manage the growing number of students who wanted to learn from the man who had beaten Apex 7. After the class ended, she approached him. "The syndicate announced something today. You should know about it." Marcus wiped sweat from his brow. "What did they say?" "They're building a new AI combatant, Apex 8. They say it will be 10 times more powerful than the one you defeated, and they're looking for challengers." He was quiet for a moment. "I expected as much. They can't let my victory stand unanswered." "Are you going to fight it?" Yara asked, though she already knew the answer. Marcus shook his head. "No, my fighting days are over. This body has given everything it has." He touched his injured shoulder, which still ached when the weather changed. "But I have taught others. When Apex 8 enters the arena, it will face gladiators who know how to fight machines. It will face humans who believe in themselves. And if they lose, then others will try, and others after that. The syndicate can build as many machines as they want, but they can never kill what I started. Hope is harder to destroy than any gladiator." The months passed, and Marcus continued to teach. His reputation grew beyond the arena, beyond the gladiator quarters, beyond even the planet itself. People from distant worlds sent messages asking for his wisdom. Some traveled for weeks just to meet the man who had defeated the unbeatable machine. He met with all of them, from the poorest workers to the richest merchants. He shared his story with everyone who would listen, not because he wanted glory, but because he wanted them to understand what he had learned. "We are not weak," he told a group of factory workers who had come to see him. "We are not inferior. The machines may be faster and stronger, but they are limited in ways that we are not. They can only do what they are programmed to do. We can dream. We can create. We can love. We can sacrifice. These are powers that no algorithm can match." The workers listened with tears in their eyes. They had spent their lives feeling worthless, replaced by automation, discarded by a society that valued efficiency over humanity. Now they were hearing something different. Now they were hearing that they mattered. The day finally came when Apex 8 made its debut in the arena. It was even more terrifying than its predecessor, a towering figure of gleaming metal with 4 arms instead of 2. Its sensors could track movement in complete darkness. Its reaction time was measured in nanoseconds. The syndicate proclaimed it the ultimate warrior, impossible to defeat. But this time, there were gladiators willing to face it. 3 of Marcus's students had volunteered, young fighters who had trained for months under his guidance. They knew the risks. They knew they might die, but they also knew that some things were worth dying for. Marcus watched the first fight from the stands, sitting in the section reserved for retired champions. Yara sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly together. The first gladiator, a woman named Rena, entered the arena with her head held high. She had been one of Marcus's best students, quick to learn and even quicker to adapt. She carried twin blades, weapons that she had trained with for years. Apex 8 did not wait for the starting bell. It charged across the sand like a silver demon, its 4 arms spinning in patterns too complex for the eye to follow. The crowd gasped as the machine closed in on the small human woman. But Rena was ready. She had trained for this moment. She had learned from the man who had done the impossible. She moved like water, flowing around the machine's attacks with grace that seemed almost supernatural. Her blades flashed in the arena lights, finding gaps in the AI's defenses that its designers had thought were too small to matter. The fight lasted 20 minutes. In the end, Rena fell, her body broken by a blow she could not dodge. But she had done something remarkable. She had damaged Apex 8. She had proven that even this new machine was not invincible. The second gladiator did even better, lasting 30 minutes and inflicting more damage. The third managed to shut down one of the machine's arms before finally being defeated. All three survived their fights, though badly injured. The Syndicate had programmed Apex 8 not to kill, hoping to avoid the public relations disaster that would come from more human deaths. They thought this would make their machine seem merciful. Instead, it gave the gladiators more chances to learn, more chances to improve, more chances to find the weaknesses that would eventually bring the machine down. 3 years passed. Marcus grew older, his hair turning completely white, his face lined with the marks of time. But his spirit remained as strong as ever. Every day he taught new students. Every day he shared the lessons he had learned. Every day he watched as humanity's confidence grew. The arena had changed. Where once the crowds had cheered only for machines, now they were divided. More and more spectators came to support the human gladiators, wearing symbols that represented flesh and blood over steel and circuits. Apex 8 had been defeated 3 times now, by 3 different gladiators trained in Marcus's methods. Each victory had sent waves through the galaxy, proving that his original triumph was not a fluke, but the beginning of something larger. The Syndicate was in crisis. Their stock prices had fallen as public confidence in AI supremacy wavered. Their political allies were distancing themselves. Even their own employees were beginning to question the direction the company was taking. And then came the announcement that changed everything. The Galactic Council, the governing body that oversaw laws across inhabited space, declared that AI combatants would no longer be allowed in the arena. The decision was based on ethical concerns, they said, about the message that human versus machine fights sent to society. But everyone knew the real reason. The machines were losing, and nobody wanted to watch a symbol of technological superiority get beaten by flesh and blood. Marcus received the news in his small room, the same room he had lived in for nearly 20 years. Yara brought him a bottle of wine to celebrate, a luxury he rarely allowed himself. "You did it," she said, pouring him a glass. "You changed the galaxy." He accepted the wine but did not drink immediately. "I didn't do anything except refuse to give up. The change came from everyone who believed in what I started." "You're too humble." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I'm honest. One man can light a spark, but it takes many to build a fire. Every gladiator who trained with me, every worker who stood up for themselves, every person who looked at a machine and refused to feel inferior, they are the ones who made this possible." He finally took a sip of the wine. It was good, better than anything he had tasted in years. He savored it slowly, thinking about all the fights he had survived, all the battles he had won and lost, all the years he had spent in this place. "What will you do now?" Yara asked. "With the AI fights banned, the arena will be different, quieter maybe." Marcus smiled. "I'll keep teaching. As long as there are people who want to learn, I'll be here. Not just about fighting, but about life, about what it means to be human in a galaxy full of machines." He reached for the photograph of his daughter, which still sat on his table after all these years. The image had faded slightly, but her smile was as bright as ever. "I wish she could have seen this," he said quietly. "I wish she could have known that her death was not meaningless, that something good came from all that pain." Yara put a hand on his shoulder. "She would be proud of you. Any daughter would be." The years continued to pass. Marcus grew old, his body finally failing in the way that all bodies eventually must. But his legacy lived on in the gladiators he had trained, in the workers who had found their voice, in the billions of beings across the galaxy who had learned to believe in themselves. When he finally died, at the age of 67, the galaxy mourned. Flags flew at half-staff on 100 worlds. Moments of silence were observed in arenas and factories and government buildings. Leaders from across known space sent messages of condolence. But the greatest tribute came from the gladiators themselves. On the day of his funeral, every fighter in Arena Prime gathered on the sand where Marcus had achieved his impossible victory. They stood in silence, their weapons raised, saluting the man who had shown them what humanity could do. Yara spoke at the ceremony, her voice strong despite the tears that rolled down her cheeks. Marcus Cole was not just a gladiator, she said. He was not just a teacher or a symbol. He was proof that the human spirit cannot be calculated or predicted. That flesh and blood contained something that no machine can match. He taught us to believe in ourselves when the entire galaxy told us we were worthless. He showed us that strength is not about muscles or weapons, but about the will to keep fighting even when victory seems impossible. She paused, looking up at the screens that showed Marcus's face, the same image that had been broadcast across the galaxy on the day of his legendary victory. He is gone now, she continued, but what he started will never die. As long as there are humans who refuse to surrender, who stand up to machines and tyrants and impossible odds, Marcus Cole's legacy will live on. He turned our despair into awe. He made us believe again, and for that we will always be grateful. The gladiators lowered their weapons and bowed their heads. Then, one by one, they began to chant his name. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. The chant spread through the crowd, growing louder and louder until it filled the entire arena. It echoed off the walls, rising to the dome above, carrying the name of a simple man who had done extraordinary things. In homes across the galaxy, families watched the ceremony and joined in the chant. Factory workers paused their machines to speak his name. Ships traveling through the void broadcast the sound to anyone who could hear. And somewhere in a place beyond the reach of sensors or algorithms, a young woman with bright eyes and a warm smile looked down on her father's legacy and smiled. The machines had been powerful. The machines had been fast and strong and intelligent. But in the end, the machines had failed to understand the one thing that made humans special. Humans never stop fighting. Even when they are old and tired and broken, even when the odds are against them, even when everyone says they cannot win, humans find a way. They dig deep into that place where hope lives and pull out something that no equation can predict. Marcus Cole had shown the galaxy that truth, and because of him, humanity would never forget it. The arena still stands today. The fights continue, though now they are only between humans, tests of skill and courage that honor the ancient traditions Marcus had preserved. On the wall of the main entrance, there is a statue of an old man holding a sword, his face marked by scars and age but his eyes burning with determination. The inscription at the base is simple: Marcus Cole, the iron will of humanity. He defied the machines and turned despair into awe. Every gladiator who passes through those doors touches the statue for luck. Every visitor stops to read the words and remember what one human achieved. And every year, on the anniversary of his great victory, the arena fills with people who come to celebrate not just a man, but an idea. The idea that humanity is special, that flesh and blood have value beyond what any machine can measure, that the spirit of defiance lives in every human heart, waiting to be awakened. Marcus Cole is gone, but the fire he lit burns brighter than ever. And it will never go out.